Section 4 of Divots by P.G. Wodehouse. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. High Stakes, Part 2. Gladstone Bott was awaiting him on the first tee, in company with two caddies. A curt greeting, a spin of the coin, and Gladstone Bott, securing the honor, stepped out to begin the contest. Although there are, of course, endless subspecies in their ranks, not all of which have yet been classified by science, 24 handicap golfers may be stated broadly to fall into two classes, the dashing and the cautious, those, that is to say, who endeavor to do every hole in a brilliant one, and those who are content to win with a steady 9. Gladstone Bott was one of the cautious brigade. He fussed about for a few moments like a hen scratching gravel, then with a stiff quarter swing sent his ball straight down the fairway for a matter of 70 yards, and it was Bradbury Fisher's turn to drive. Now, normally, Bradbury Fisher was essentially a dasher. It was his habit, as a rule, to raise his left foot some 6 inches from the ground, and having swayed forcefully back onto his right leg, to sway sharply forward again and slash out with sickening violence in the general direction of the ball. It was a method at which times produced excellent results, though it had the flaw that it was somewhat uncertain. Bradbury Fisher was the only member of the club, with the exception of the club champion, who had ever carried the second green with his drive. But on the other hand, he was also the only member who had ever laid his drive on the 11th dead to the pin of the 16th. But today the magnitude of the issues at stake had wrought a change in him. Planted firmly on both feet, he fiddled at the ball in the manner of one playing spillikins. Then he swung. It was with a swing resembling that of Gladstone Bott. And like Bott, he achieved a nice, steady, rainbow-shaped drive of some 70 yards straight down the middle. Bott replied with an 80-yard brassy shot. Bradbury held him with another. And so, working their way cautiously across the prairie, they came to the green, where Bradbury, laying his third putt dead, halved the hole. The second was a repetition of the first, the third and fourth repetitions of the second. But on the 5th green the fortunes of the match began to change. Here Gladstone Bott, faced with a 15-foot putt to win, smote his ball firmly off the line, as had been his practice at each of the preceding holes, and the ball, hitting a worm cast and bounding off to the left, ran on a couple of yards, hit another worm cast, bounded to the right, and finally, bumping into a twig, leapt to the left again and clattered into the tin. "One up," said Gladstone Bott. "Tricky, some of these greens are. You have to gauge the angles to a nicety." At the 6th the donkey in an adjoining field uttered a raucous bray just as Bott was addressing his ball with a mashy niblick on the edge of the green. He started violently, and jerking his club with a spasmodic reflex action of the forearm, holed out. "Nice work," said Gladstone Bott. The 7th was a short hole, guarded by 2 large bunkers between which ran a narrow footpath of turf. Gladstone Bott's mashy shot, falling short, ran over the rough, peered for a moment into the depths to the left, then, winding up the path, trickled on to the green, struck a fortunate slope, acquired momentum, ran on, and dropped into the hole. "Nearly missed it," said Gladstone Bott, drawing a deep breath. Bradbury Fisher looked out upon a world that swam and danced before his eyes. He had not been prepared for this sort of thing. The way things were shaping, he felt that it would hardly surprise him now if the cups were to start jumping up and snapping at Bott's ball like starving dogs. "3 up," said Gladstone Bott. With a strong effort Bradbury Fisher mastered his feelings. His mouth set grimly. Matters, he perceived, had reached a crisis. He saw now that he had made a mistake in allowing himself to be intimidated by the importance of the occasion into being scientific. Nature had never intended him for a scientific golfer, and up till now he had been behaving like an animated illustration out of a book by Varden. He had taken his club back along and near the turf, allowing it to trend around the legs as far as was permitted by the movement of the arms. He had kept his right elbow close to the side. This action coming into operation before the club was allowed to describe a section of a circle in an upward direction, whence it was carried by means of a slow, steady, swinging movement. He had pivoted, he had pronated the wrists, and he had been careful about the lateral hip shift. And it had been all wrong. That sort of stuff might suit some people, but not him. He was a biffer, a swatter, and a slosher, and it flashed upon him now that only by biffing, swatting, and sloshing as he had never biffed, swatted, and sloshed before, could he hope to recover the ground he had lost. Gladstone Bott was not one of those players who grow careless with success. His drive at the eighth was just as steady and short as ever, but this time Bradbury Fisher made no attempt to imitate him. For 7 holes he had been checking his natural instincts, and now he drove with all the banked-up fury that comes with release from long suppression. For an instant he remained poised on one leg like a stork. Then there was a whistle and a crack, and the ball, smitten squarely in the midriff, flew down the course and, soaring over the bunkers, hit the turf and gambled within 20 yards of the green. He straightened out the kinks in his spine with a grim smile. Allowing himself the regulation 3 putts, he would be down in 5, and only a miracle could give Gladstone Bott anything better than a 7. 2 down, he said some minutes later, and Gladstone Bott nodded sullenly. It was not often that Bradbury Fisher kept on the fairway with 2 consecutive drives, but strange things were happening today. Not only was his drive at the 9th a full 240 yards, but it was also perfectly straight. 1 down, said Bradbury Fisher, and Bott nodded even more sullenly than before. There are few things more demoralizing than to be consistently outdriven, and when he is outdriven by 170 yards at 2 consecutive holes, the bravest man is apt to be shaken. Gladstone Bott was only human. It was with a sinking heart that he watched his opponent heave and sway on the 10th tee. And when the ball once more flew straight and far down the course, a strange weakness seemed to come over him. For the first time he lost his morale and topped. The ball trickled into the long grass, and after 3 fruitless stabs at it with a niblick he picked up, and the match was squared. At the 11th Bradbury Fisher also topped, and his tee shot, though nice and straight, travelled only a couple of feet. He had to scramble to halve in 8. The 12th was another short hole, and Bradbury, unable to curb the fine, careless rapture which had crept into his game, had the misfortune to overshoot the green by some 60 yards, thus enabling his opponent to take the lead once more. The 13th and 14th were halved, but Bradbury, driving another long ball, won the 15th, squaring the match. It seemed to Bradbury Fisher, as he took his stand on the 16th tee, that he now had the situation well in hand. At the 13th and 14th his drive had flickered, but on the 15th it had come back in all its glorious vigor, and there appeared to be no reason to suppose that it had not come to stay. He recollected exactly how he had done that last colossal slosh, and he now prepared to reproduce the movements precisely as before. The great thing to remember was to hold the breath on the backswing, and not to release it before the moment of impact. Also, the eyes should not be closed until late in the downswing. All great golfers have their little secrets, and that was Bradbury's. With these aids to success firmly fixed in his mind, Bradbury Fisher prepared to give the ball the nastiest bang that a golf ball had ever had since Edward Blackwell was in his prime. He drew in his breath, and with lungs expanded to their fullest capacity, heaved back onto his large, flat right foot. Then, clenching his teeth, he lashed out. When he opened his eyes, they fell upon a horrid spectacle. Either he had closed those eyes too soon, or else he had breathed too precipitately. Whatever the cause, the ball, which should have gone due south, was travelling with great speed south-southeast, and even as he gazed, it curved to earth and fell as uninviting a bit of rough as he had ever penetrated. And he was a man who had spent much time in many roughs. Leaving Gladstone Bott to continue his imitation of a spavined octogenarian rolling peanuts with a toothpick, Bradbury Fisher, followed by his caddy, set out on the long trail into the jungle. Hope did not altogether desert him as he walked. In spite of its erratic direction, the ball had been so shrewdly smitten that it was not far from the green. Provided luck was with him and the lie not too desperate, a mashie would put him on the carpet. It was only when he reached the rough and saw what had happened that his heart sank. There the ball lay, half hidden in the grass, while above it waved the strangling tentacle of some tough-looking shrub. Behind it was a stone, and behind the stone, at just the elevation required to catch the backswing of the club, was a tree. And, by an ironical stroke of fate, which drew from Bradbury a hollow, bitter laugh, only a few feet to the right was a beautiful smooth piece of turf, from which it would have been a pleasure to play 1 second. Dully, Bradbury looked about to see how Bott was getting on. And then suddenly, as he found that Bott was completely invisible behind the belt of bushes through which he had just passed, a voice seemed to whisper to him, "Why not?" Bradbury Fisher, remember, had spent 30 years in Wall Street. It was at this moment that he realized that he was not alone. His caddy was standing at his side. Bradbury Fisher gazed upon the caddy, whom until now he had not had any occasion to observe with any closeness. The caddy was not a boy. He was a man, apparently in the middle 40s, with bushy eyebrows and a walrus mustache, and there was something about his appearance which suggested to Bradbury that here was a kindred spirit. He reminded Bradbury a little of Spike Huggins, the safe-blower who had been a fresher with him at Sing Sing. It seemed to him that this caddy could be trusted in a delicate matter involving secrecy and silence. Had he been some babbling urchin, the risk might have been too great. "Caddy," said Bradbury. "Sir?" said the caddy. "Yours is an ill-paid job," said Bradbury. "It is indeed, sir," said the caddy. "Would you like to earn $50? "I would prefer to earn 100. "I meant 100, said Bradbury. He produced a roll of bills from his pocket and peeled off one of that value. Then, stooping, he picked up his ball and placed it on the little oasis of turf. The caddy bowed intelligently. "You mean to say," cried Gladstone Bott a few moments later, "that you were out with your second? With your second? I had a stroke of luck. You're sure it wasn't about 6 strokes of luck? My ball was right out in the open in an excellent lie." "Oh," said Gladstone Bott shortly. "I have 4 for it, I think." "1 down," said Gladstone Bott. "And 2 to play," trilled Bradbury. It was with a light heart that Bradbury Fisher teed up on the 17th. The match, he felt, was as good as over. The whole essence of golf is to discover a way of getting out of rough without losing strokes, and with this sensible, broad-minded man of the world caddying for him, he seemed to have discovered the ideal way. It cost him scarcely a pang when he saw his drive slice away into a tangle of long grass, but for the sake of appearances he affected a little chagrin. "Tut, tut," he said. "I shouldn't worry," said Gladstone Bott. "You'll probably find it sitting upon an India-rubber tee, which someone has dropped there." He spoke sardonically, and Bradbury did not like his manner. But then he never liked Gladstone Bott's manner, so what of that? He made his way to where the ball had fallen. It was lying under a bush. "Caddy," said Bradbury. "Sir," said the caddy. 100? And 50. And 50, said Bradbury Fisher. Gladstone Bott was still toiling along the fairway when Bradbury reached the green. "How many?" he asked, eventually winning to the goal. "On in 2, said Bradbury. "And you?" "Playing 7. "Let me see. If you take 2 putts, which is most unlikely, I shall have 6 for the hole and match." A minute later Bradbury had picked up his ball out of the cup. He stood there, basking in the sunshine, his heart glowing with quiet happiness. It seemed to him that he had never seen the countryside looking so beautiful. The birds appeared to be singing as they had never sung before. The trees and the rolling turf had taken on a charm beyond anything he had ever encountered. Even Gladstone Bott almost looked bearable. "A very pleasant match," he said cordially, "conducted throughout in the most sporting spirit. At one time I thought you were going to pull it off, old man. But class will tell." "I will now make my report," said the caddy with the walrus mustache. "Do so," said Gladstone Bott briefly. Bradbury Fisher stared at the man with blanched cheeks. The sun had ceased to shine. The birds had stopped singing. The trees and the rolling turf looked pretty rotten, and Gladstone Bott perfectly foul. His heart was leadened with a hideous dread. "Your report? Your report? What do you mean?" "You don't suppose," said Gladstone Bott, "that I would play you an important match unless I had detectives watching you, do you? This gentleman is from Quick Results Agency. What have you to report?" he said, turning to the caddy. The caddy removed his bushy eyebrows, and with a quick gesture swept off his mustache. "On the 12th inst," he began in a monotonous sing-song voice, "acting upon instructions received, I made my way to the Goldenville golf links in order to observe the movements of the man Fisher. I had adopted for the occasion the No. 3 disguise, and—" All right, said Gladstone Bott impatiently. "You can skip all that. Come down to what happened at the 16th. The caddy looked wounded, but he bowed deferentially. "At the 16th hole the man Fisher moved his ball into what, from his actions and furtive manner, I deduced to be a more favorable position." "Ah," said Gladstone Bott. "On the 17th the man Fisher picked up his ball and threw it with a movement of the wrist on to the green." "It's a lie, a foul and contemptible lie," shouted Bradbury Fisher. "Realizing that the man Fisher might adopt this attitude, sir," said the caddy, "I took the precaution of snapshotting him in the act with my miniature wrist-watch camera, the detective's best friend." Bradbury Fisher covered his face with his hands and uttered a hollow groan. "My match," said Gladstone Bott with vindictive triumph. "I'll trouble you to deliver that butler to me FOB at my residence not later than noon tomorrow. Oh, yes, and I was forgetting. You owe me 3 railroads." Blizzard, dignified but kindly, met Bradbury in the Byzantine Hall on his return home. "I trust your golf match terminated satisfactorily, sir?" said the butler. A pang, almost too poignant to be borne, shot through Bradbury. "No, Blizzard," he said, "no. Thank you for your kind inquiry, but I was not in luck." "Too bad, sir," said Blizzard sympathetically. "I trust the price at stake was not excessive." Well, it was rather big. I should like to speak to you about that a little later, Blizzard." "At any time that is suitable to you, sir. If you will ring for one of the assistant under footmen when you desire to see me, sir, he will find me in my pantry. Meanwhile, sir, this cable arrived for you a short while back." Bradbury took the envelope listlessly. He had been expecting a communication from his London agents announcing that they had bought Kent and Sussex, for which he had instructed them to make a firm offer just before he left England. No doubt this was their cable. He opened the envelope, and started as if it had contained a scorpion. It was from his wife. "Returning immediately. Aquitania," it ran. "Docking Friday night. Meet without fail." Bradbury stared at the words, frozen to the marrow. Although he had been in a sort of trance ever since that dreadful moment on the 17th green, his great brain had not altogether ceased to function. And, while driving home in the car, he had sketched out roughly a plan of action which, he felt, might meet the crisis. Assuming that Mrs. Fisher was to remain abroad for another month, he had practically decided to buy a daily paper, insert in it a front-page story announcing the death of Blizzard, forward the clipping to his wife, and then sell his house and move to another neighborhood. In this way it might be that she would never learn of what had occurred. But if she was due back next Friday, the scheme fell through and the exposure was inevitable. He wondered dully what had caused her change of plans, and came to the conclusion that some feminine sixth sense must have warned her of peril-threatening Blizzard. With a good deal of peevishness he wished that Providence had never endowed women with this sixth sense. A woman with merely 5 took quite enough handling. "Sweet suffering soup-spoons," groaned Bradbury. "Sir," said Blizzard. "Nothing," said Bradbury. "Very good, sir," said Blizzard. For a man with anything on his mind, any little trouble calculated to affect the joie de vivre, there are few spots less cheering than the customs sheds of New York. Drafts whistle dismally there, now to, now fro. Strange voices are heard. Customs officials chew gum and lurk grimly in the shadows, like tigers awaiting the luncheon gong. It is not surprising that Bradbury's spirits, low when he reached the place, should have shrunk to zero long before the gangplank was lowered and the passengers began to stream down it. His wife was among the first to land. How beautiful she looked, thought Bradbury as he watched her, and alas, how intimidating. His tastes had always lain in the direction of spirited women. His first wife had been spirited, so had his second, third, and fourth. And the one at the moment holding office was perhaps the most spirited of the whole platoon. For one long instant, as he went to meet her, Bradbury Fisher was conscious of a regret that he had not married one of those meek, mild girls, who suffer uncomplainingly at their husbands' hands in the more hectic type of feminine novel. What he felt he could have done with at the moment was the sort of wife who thinks herself dashed lucky if the other half of the sketch does not drag her round the billiard-room by her hair, kicking her the while with spiked shoes. 3 conversational openings presented themselves to him as he approached her. "Darling, there is something I want to tell you." "Dearest, I have a small confession to make." "Sweetheart, I don't know if by chance you remember Blizzard, our butler. Well, it's like this." But in the event, it was she who spoke first. "Oh, Bradbury," she cried, rushing into his arms, "I've done the most awful thing, and you must try to forgive me." Bradbury blinked. He had never seen her in this strange mood before. As she clung to him, she seemed timid, fluttering, and although a woman who weighed a full 157 pounds, almost fragile. "What is it?" he inquired tenderly. "Has somebody stolen your jewels?" "No, no." "Have you been losing money at bridge?" "No, no, worse than that." Bradbury started. "You didn't sing 'My Little Grey Home in the West' at the ship's concert?" he demanded, eyeing her closely. "No, no. How can I tell you? Bradbury, look. You see that man over there?" Bradbury followed her pointing finger. Standing in an attitude of negligent dignity beside a pile of trunks under the letter V was a tall, stout, ambassadorial man, at the very sight of whom, even at this distance, Bradbury Fisher felt an odd sense of inferiority. His pendulous cheeks, his curving waistcoat, his protruding eyes, and the sequence of rolling chins combined to produce in Bradbury that instinctive feeling of being in the presence of a superior which we experience when meeting scratch golfers, head waiters of fashionable restaurants, and traffic policemen. A sudden pang of suspicion pierced him. "Well," he said hoarsely, "what of him?" "Bradbury, you must not judge me too harshly. We were thrown together, and I was tempted." "Woman," thundered Bradbury Fisher, "who is this man?" "His name is Vosper." "And what is there between you and him, and when did it start, and why and how and where?" Mrs. Fisher dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. "It was at the Duke of Bootle's, Bradbury. I was invited there for the week-end." "And this man was there?" "Yes." "Ah, proceed." "The moment I set eyes on him, something seemed to go all over me." "Indeed." "At first it was his mere appearance. I felt that I had dreamed of such a man all my life, and that for all these wasted years I had been putting up with the second best." "Oh, you did, eh? Really? Is that so? You did you?" snorted Bradbury Fisher. "I couldn't help it, Bradbury. I know I have always seemed so devoted to Blizzard, and so I was. But honestly, there's no comparison between them. Really there isn't. You should see the way Vosper stood behind the Duke's chair, like a high priest presiding over some mystic religious ceremony, and his voice when he asks you if you will have sherry or hock, like the music of some wonderful organ. I couldn't resist him. I approached him delicately, and found that he was willing to come to America. He had been 18 years with the Duke, and he told me he couldn't stand the sight of the back of his head any longer, so—" Bradbury Fisher reeled. "This man, this Vosper, who is he?" "Why, I'm telling you, honey. He was the Duke's butler, and now he's ours. Oh, you know how impulsive I am. Honestly, it wasn't till we were halfway across the Atlantic that I suddenly said to myself, 'What about Blizzard?' What am I to do, Bradbury? I simply haven't the nerve to fire Blizzard. And yet what will happen when he walks into his pantry and finds Vosper there? Oh, think, Bradbury, think." Bradbury Fisher was thinking, and for the first time in a week without agony. "Evangeline," he said gravely, "this is awkward." "I know." "Extremely awkward." I know. But surely you can think of some way out of the muddle." "I may. I cannot promise, but I may." He pondered deeply. "Ah, I have it. It is just possible that I may be able to induce Gladstone Bott to take on Blizzard." "Do you really think he would?" "He may, if I play my cards carefully. At any rate, I will try to persuade him. For the moment you and Vosper had better remain in New York, while I go home and put the negotiations in train. If I am successful, I will let you know. Do try your very hardest. I think I shall be able to manage it. Gladstone and I are old friends, and he would stretch a point to oblige me. But let this be a lesson to you, Evangeline." "Oh, I will." "By the way," said Bradbury Fisher, "I am cabling my London agents today to instruct them to buy J. H. Taylor's shirt stud for my collection." "Quite right, Bradbury darling. And anything else you want in that way you will get, won't you?" "I will," said Bradbury Fisher. Section 4